Thank you so much for being with us this afternoon. I think as a moderator, one of the things that I've learned is that the best thing to do is to talk less and let everyone else talk. And so I'm going to be very quick in terms of my opening this evening and give the panelists an opportunity to speak, and then all of you who are here an opportunity to engage, so that we walk away with some real action items of things that we can do to deal with this crisis, the human toll of gun violence. I want to thank Amnesty International for having me to be here today, and particularly my friend and brother who's here and helped to organize many of this, Mr. Marvin Bing. Thank you. And I also want to just give a little disclaimer that I've had a cold for 60% of the winter, and so I'm coughing and going through a lot of different issues. So if I start having the whooping cough, just pray for me and continue to work with me. And of course, we have these great panelists here who I'm going to introduce in a few moments. But it was mentioned that 12 years ago, my son's father was murdered. I got a call from my mom one night telling me that my son's father had been found in a ditch, and he had been there dead for 2 weeks. He had been shot in the head after being tortured for several hours. The folks that he was living with were looking for drugs. He was involved in drug activity, and they were looking for drugs that they believed he stole. And so they tortured him to find out the information, and he actually didn't have it, didn't know anything about the issue, and he was killed. And as I said, he was left in a park. He was dead for 2 weeks before a woman walking her dog found him. They discovered his body, and by the time he was found, he was completely decomposed. We were unable to see him. The only way that I was able to actually identify him was through a picture where they showed me a tattoo of my son's name that he had done maybe a month before he was killed on his neck. And so since my son just turned 15 now, so we're actually almost 13 years into Jason's death. He was a little baby at the time, and I just remember thinking to myself, wow, the only other person who's really responsible for helping me raise my child is gone. And now here we are, and it was something that my family and I had to come together and deal with on our own. And although I have this great family network, I'm involved in a lot. I work in organizations and work with people who really help me to sort of raise my son. And my parents have been co-parents. There's nothing like the actual father of the child who you have. And so at 15 years old, I can see there are different things that he does and questions that he has. And his father is not here to help him. And so it is constantly a struggle for me. But I think one of the things that we're going to talk about on this panel is how many of us have really tried to transform sort of the pain that we've been through into some positive activity. And it hurts. You want to lay down, cry, and feel sorry for yourself, but then you realize that there's another family that needs you, or another person that needs to be saved before we get there. And so a lot of people wonder why I tell that Jason was involved in drug activity. I think the reality is that when we start talking about the cause of gun violence and all of the death that we see with our young people, there are some very serious challenges that people are dealing with. Economic challenges, and cultural challenges and social challenges that are happening in communities all over this country, and clearly mental health issues that people are dealing with that create these environments. So this is a young man who grew up in a household where his parents, both of them, were in jail most of his life. And so it's obviously no excuse, but if we don't present folks with opportunities, they find themselves in situations like what happened with him. And now he is not here to help raise the child that he helped to bear. So it's a difficult space, but I think the thing that helps me is that I've been involved in helping so many other people over many, many years to deal with either the trauma or to just reach out and talk to their young people and help them understand why they don't want to be in the position that I'm in or in the position that my 15-year-old son is in. And so today we have this great panel of folks who can definitely speak to this. These are people who are working, whether they are victims or are organizers, they're working in this area. And our issue is always this sort of concept around, what do I do? I care about this issue. It sounds really sad. You know, I saw what happened in my local neighborhood. I saw what happened on the news. And I just don't know what I can do to be a part of the process. The problem seems so big, and it is a big problem. It's definitely a big issue that requires many layers of people's engagement in order to deal with the issue. And so we come together today, some folks who know a little bit about what we could be doing, what we should be doing, and how individual people, folks who don't necessarily have lots of money, who are not presidents of organizations, but just individual people can get involved. While we wait for legislation to be passed in our government or for Superman to come and save us, it is actually individual folks, organizers, just citizens who are concerned and want to be advocates. Those are the people who have an opportunity, all of you who are sitting here, to have the greatest impact. And one of the things that was mentioned right before the panel started by my brother, Michael Scholnick, is that many of you who are here are younger people. And that is a very, very powerful area that we have to tap into in order to address the issue of gun violence. Why do I say that? Because you all are the carriers of the message of peace, of safety, and particularly that word peace. And what do I mean by that? You all have the Twitter, Instagram, and all of the different networks to be able to get messaging out. So when you find out that there's a fight going on or a beef happening in your neighborhood or in your school, do you spread the message? Do you continue to transfer this message of hate and what could potentially become the loss of life? Or do you not necessarily participate in this type of activity and try your best not to be a part of the problem, but rather a part of the solution? So that's just one way that we feel young people can be involved. But there's so many other ways that you can advocate for change and advocate for peace in your own communities and to help save lives, because that's really what this is all about. Chicago has clearly become a place that is known for gun violence, and particularly in the African American community. It is, we hear some very sad and serious stories that come out of the Chicago community. We hear, you know, the news, the death toll at times is heart-wrenching and scary. You can't believe that 11 people can be shot in one weekend in one area in Chicago, in any particular city, particularly in the greatest country in this nation. But it does in fact happen. It happens here in Chicago very often. And we have a family here with us today that I want to introduce. We're going to allow everyone to talk a little bit about themselves rather than me going into introducing each person. We're going to have them to talk about themselves as I bring them to be a part of the conversation. But we have the Pendleton family. And I want to jump straight to you guys because I think it is important, Cleopatra and Nate, that we preference this conversation about the human toll of gun violence by talking to two people who have experienced it at the deepest point, losing not even your male child, but your daughter, a young teenage female, beautiful young lady who was on her way to greatness by all accounts, and that is Hadayah Pendleton, who we see here on the screen. So I want to start, either one of you can start, or Cleopatra if you'd like to just talk about what it felt like the day you found out that your daughter had been killed, and then what it's been like, this journey to turn your pain into activism. How have you even been able to get up and deal with activism on a daily basis?
Excuse me. Thank you. What it felt like the day that I received the phone call that my daughter had been shot is indescribable. Because it's the furthest thing, it was the furthest thing from our life. Like, there's no reason for my daughter to fall victim to gun violence because she didn't hang out with risky individuals. She didn't put herself in environments that were questionable. If she saw something questionable, she removed herself. Not only that, she was at school. So why? would I be getting this phone call about her being shot. You know, I have to say, the messaging from medical staff that you've lost your child is unreal. I died, literally. We died, literally, when they proceeded to tell us that she didn't make it because Hadayah was a fighter in terms of, you know, what she believed in, what she was about, her moral standards. She had those. And so to hear that there's a situation that occurred to my child that she could not beat was unimaginable. It is unimaginable. And we deal with that on a daily basis. 15 months ago, she was shot, but it's like 15 minutes ago, every single day. Just recently, the tears, you know, haven't come the way that they normally do, but the time, there is no gap. You know, the calendar months, they increment for other people, not us. How do we find ourselves able to do what we're doing? Because we have a community. We had a family of people that we looked out for each other's children. So for us to be in a situation where we've lost our own, we can't imagine actually having a conversation with someone else and them understanding what we're saying. When we're broke down, when we can't go on throughout our day like regular, you know, because everyone wants to look at you like you're regular because it makes them more comfortable. When we can't go on a day that seems just perfectly normal, on the sunniest day, we don't want them to understand why that is. So in order to not have that conversation, in order to not have to console someone the way that we need to be consoled, we'd rather be out here and use our voices.
So Nate, what does that mean, using your voice? What are you guys doing, particularly with the Hadayah Pendleton Foundation?
Well, first, I'd really like to thank Amnesty International for having us here. Moving forward, we decided to have to create this foundation to help at-risk kids like the ones that murdered our daughter, to hopefully prevent this from happening again. We want to try to, prevent this in terms of offering or trying to create jobs for kids, mentorship, and just giving them a place, a rest haven where they can come and socialize with each other. Because, I mean, that's what she was doing the day that she ended up getting shot. She was just in the park with the volleyball team socializing. And all kids should be able to use the parks. That's what they were made for. That's what they're built for kids to go recreate, have fun, talk and socialize. So our main focus with our foundation is to really try to reach out and first try to pinpoint what are the individual problems with them, which there are many. And the only thing we could do is just try to tackle one at a time. And hopefully we could save a kid at a time.
Well, I think everyone here would join me in thanking you for your service and your work and what you're trying to do. So thank you very much. So Sarah, along that same vein, you are a senior at Newtown High School, and all of us here know about the horrific shooting that happened in Newtown, Connecticut on December 14, 2012. And Sarah, you almost lost your mom. Your mom is a teacher at Sandy Hook Elementary School. Tell me what you feel like. I know now how old are you?
I'm 18.
18 years old, working to reduce gun violence and bridge the gap between communities. Because I think I read that one of the things that you've said is that this is not an issue for one community or the other. We have to work together to address youth, particularly youth violence. So tell me the same question that I asked Cleo. What did it feel like when you heard that your mom almost died or could have been dead? I don't know the circumstances. And since then, how have you been able not to just shut the door and say, we survived and now let's move on, but really to engage in activism?
Thank you so much to everybody on this panel. I'm so humbled to be sitting here with you all, and thank you to Amnesty International. That day, I was in my physics classroom. We were working on a lab project, and I remember my principal, went on a loudspeaker and said, "You must go in a lockdown drill. This is not a drill, though." And so we went under the lab tables, and we sat there for 10, 20, 30 minutes, and it started creeping up to an hour. And that's when we knew that it definitely was not a drill. And we weren't supposed to use our cell phones during drills, but clearly this wasn't one. So I pulled mine out, and I had a text from my dad that just said, "Shooting at Sandy Hook." And at first, I don't even think my mind allowed me to process that it could be the school. We have like a Sandy Hook area, Sandy Hook Center. And so I asked him, "Is it the school?" And he said, after I had to wait a good amount of time, and it was agonizing to sit there and wait for what felt like forever to get that yes text message. And my mom, like you said, is a second grade teacher at Sandy Hook. I then had to wait about another hour or so before we were able to leave lockdown. And my principal said on the loudspeaker, "If anybody has family or friends at Sandy Hook Elementary School, you must go to the lecture hall." And that's where I was able to call my mom for the first time and speak to her for the first time. My mom saved her entire classroom of students, as well as 2 kids that she pulled into her classroom from the hallway.
Is your mom's here
My mom
today?
is here. She's brave enough to be here today with us. So, that night we were able to go home, my whole family, all of us at least physically safe, which, 26 other families couldn't say that. And I think even hours after it happened, something in me told me that the only way I was going to be able to move forward was if I helped other people get through it too, and that would help me. So at first it just started with volunteer work in town. And then about a month later, there was a march in Washington, D.C., a march for gun control. And about 100 people from Newtown went down together. I went with my dad, and we marched with 6,000 other Americans on the National Mall. And that was sort of the first time that I had left Newtown since the shooting happened. And it really opened my eyes and showed me, like you said, that this is bigger than my family. This is bigger than my town, than my former elementary school. This was massive. We marched basically hand in hand with individuals from Chicago, from Atlanta, from Aurora, from Oakland, California, from all these different places, and we were united. And that was really what opened my eyes and showed me that this is so much bigger, and there are so many lives that are at stake here, and so many lives that we've already lost, that just like Mrs. Pendleton mentioned about Hadayah, she was a fighter. We have to be fighters for our generation. And that's what, when I want to back down, when I want to just crawl into my bed and cry because we're losing so many of our friends, I just remember that we have to be fighters for the ones that we've already lost.
Wow, thank you. Thank you so very much. So, Charlene and Michael, sort of as our experts, if you will, on organizing around this. Michael, I want you to tell folks a little about, both of you, to tell folks a little bit about what you do. But in that, I want to talk about, we know these sad situations and everyone gets upset. We're all into it when it first happens. But then 15 months later, those phone calls don't come as much and we're not really engaged. Some people say it's because we're desensitized. Other people say, I don't know, people have a lot of reasons. But what do you think it's going to take for us to stay engaged on a consistent basis in dealing with reducing gun violence, one, but more importantly, dealing with the internal issues that we have going on in our communities that lend itself to gun violence. Maybe Michael, whoever wants to take it.
Sure.
Charlene?
Thank you.
Of
So thank
course.
you for having me join this conversation today. I think it's an extremely important conversation, particularly to have right here in Chicago, where I grew up on the South Side, in the Back of the Yards neighborhood, in Gage Park, and Inglewood, many of the neighborhoods that you all may have heard about on the news at some point, right? And so I currently serve as the national coordinator of the Black Youth Project 100, which is a national collective of Black activists between the ages of 18 and 35. And we really focus on transformative leadership development, nonviolent direct action organizing, education, and advocacy work. Because for us, Black liberation and freedom and justice for Black people is imperative, particularly in the face of the traumas and the oppressions that we have faced and the traumas and oppressions that we continue to face. And so when the work that we do really focuses on the structural issues around violence, like structural violence. Oftentimes, we talk about the individual stories, which are at the center for many people, and how you can relate to what has happened. But it's a much bigger picture. Like what's happening in Chicago is not a Chicago problem. It's an American problem, right? And so for me and many of the members of my organization, we're across the country. It's important to us to actually organize outside of moments of crisis. We convened in a moment of crisis that we did not expect. The first time our organization met was the same weekend of the George Zimmerman verdict. The convening was planned a year in advance, but we happened to be together that weekend. And so we decided that we need to have not just organizing out of crisis, but actual organization building and movement building. Those are the things that endure. Those are the things that keep people engaged beyond a moment. And moments are an opportunity to mobilize people, but you have to have a dedicated group of folks who are committed to building base, building power for the long term. And that's something that we're committed to, and it's not easy. It's not fun, it's not cute, you're not always on TV, you don't always get all these shiny opportunities to speak at
Unless
an
you're
amazing,
Michael Scholnick, you're always on TV. Sorry, Charlene.
And so, I mean, I've had the privilege and the opportunity to do some speaking, but I think that it's important that we center the stories of the people who have actually been impacted by these issues. But just the piece about organizing is that we have to have a dedicated group of people who are committed to being in it for the long haul. And the Black Youth Project 100, we're committed to being in it for the long haul because we're Black people who, many of us, I live in a community where there's a safe passage sign, where young Black people are still shot. Like it happens. 2 blocks away from my house, someone a couple months ago was shot and killed. So it's very personal. And I actually was looking at the Amnesty report, and I would love to talk a little bit more about the safe passage route and the implications of that. But to really get to Tamika's question is that we have to have a dedicated group of people, and we have to have people who are interested in investing in those organizations. So we need organizations we need everyone to support organizations like Amnesty International. We need people to support organizations like the Pendleton Foundation, the work that Sarah does. We need people to support our work with their time and also with their money.
I think you come to these events.
You have to tell us who you are.
I'm Michael Scholnick. I'm the father of Mateo Ali. That's I think the most important job I have is taking care of our 1-year-old child, who I ran home from DC last night just to give him a kiss and hop on a plane this morning. And you realize when I listen to you, Cleo, and Nate speak, there is nothing that we can even imagine as parents. But when you come to these things, you think of what you want to say and how you want to say it, and then you're like, shit, it all just gets thrown out. You listen, you want to process it, but you have no time to process it because you're told you got to go next. So I'm glad you went before I did. So thank you. But But I'm the one on stage who hasn't been directly affected by violence as I'm listening. And I didn't know that was, I represented that, but I do. And I have no direct connection to gun violence. And I think, I sat in the courthouse in Jacksonville, Florida, just, I don't know, maybe 4 weeks ago. I've become very close to the family of Jordan Davis. And I sat in the courthouse and I sat in there's a family room set up for the family and friends of Jordan. And I was at the end of the trial, I was there at the end of the trial, and for those who watched it or who knows of the trial of Jordan Davis and Michael Dunn. For those who don't know, very briefly, he was a young man in Jacksonville, Florida, 17 years old. He was sitting with his friends in the car. He's African American. He's with three of his friends who are black. They're in the car at a gas station. A white older gentleman is coming home from his son's wedding. His girlfriend goes in the store to buy a bottle of wine. The kids are listening to loud rap music. Artists from Chicago. The guy tells them to turn the music down. They get into a verbal altercation, and the guy shoots into the car and kills Jordan. And as the car is driving away, he shoots again, gets out of the car, keeps shooting as the kids are trying to get away from. And he said that he thought they had a gun, and of course no gun was ever found. So the last 4 days of this trial, I'm sitting in the family room, and Nate, I think, and Cleo, and certainly, Tamika, I was sitting in agony, waiting for this verdict to come in. And we would pray, and we would eat, and we would laugh, and mom and dad were there, and cousins and aunts and uncles, and would sit in agony because it's 4 days of deliberations of the jury. And I go home to my hotel room, and I was like, what the fuck am I doing here? Excuse my language, but I was like, what am I doing here? Why am I here? Why? I don't have to do this. That's what I was thinking, right? Like, real honest conversations in my own head. Like, I didn't lose my child. And then I would think to myself, Cleo, like, the agony that I felt, you can't even compare. It's unjust to even try to quantify that agony of what Lucy and Ron, the parents of Jordan Davis, were going through during that time. I can't say it 10 times, 100. It wouldn't even be just to say that. And so I had to be there, even just to hold a hand, even just to share a meal, even just to go to the store and pick up some food for them because they couldn't leave the courthouse because the media was outside. And I think, I started this work when I was a child, and I've thought a lot about why. And I look at Amnesty International, I see the young people who are in this room. A lot of the work that we do in this room is ally work, especially Amnesty. A lot of the work we've done historically has been, as an organization, has been international for us who are living domestically, trying to stop torture overseas, trying to work human rights abuses overseas. So I credit Steve Hawkins for looking at what's happening in this country. But I think to myself, as a woman, I can never understand as a woman what it's like to walk through a parking lot late at night with your keys in your hand and maybe a mace can, worrying if a guy's gonna jump out from behind a car or from a car. I'll never pretend to understand that feeling ever. I just don't know that feeling. But I have to fight for her right to walk to a car safely. I have to. And so I never understand or will understand what it's like to walk through the south side of Chicago or Sanford, Florida, and have to worry about someone, the police or someone who thinks he's the police, stop me and ask me for my freedom papers. Essentially what George Zimmerman did to Trayvon Martin, say, what are you doing here? You don't belong here. Show me your papers, boy. I'll never understand that feeling because of the color of my skin, because I'm white. I'll never understand that feeling, but I have to fight for young men and young women to walk through their communities safely and not be stopped and antagonized and tortured and shot with a bullet through their heart. I have to fight that war. And so when I was listening to you, Charlene, talking and about Black liberation, as we celebrated, and Tamika put on an amazing event with the National Action Network at the March on Washington, the commemoration, 50th anniversary of the March on Washington. And I thought, Charlene, as you were speaking, I thought, you know, there's a beautiful part of that speech about dreaming. And I have a dream, and it's really pretty at the end. And we sort of celebrate that piece, which is the second half. And I was just at Morehouse this past week in Atlanta, and the speech is on the side of a building. I reread the speech, and the first half is not so pretty. The first half is about a bounced check that America has given to the African American community. And then King says an amazing line, which reminded me, as Charlene said this, about black liberation. There's a lot of white folks in the audience at that rally, and there's a lot of white folks in the audience here today, and a lot of people of color as well here today. It's a very diverse group. And King looked in the audience and he said that there's a lot of white people here at this March on Washington in 1963. And white people are beginning to realize that our freedom is inextricably bound to the freedom of black people in this country. And until they are free, we will never be free. So we can walk and be selfish and live our lives, but if young people in the city of Chicago can't go safely home from school, or can't drive through a neighborhood and not be stopped because they're driving while black, then my freedom is bullshit. Frankly, and I don't want to swear. I'm from New York, so I apologize. I swear too much.
I swear all the time. Me too.
So anyhow, that's enough.
Well, that was some very powerful stuff. You know, since we talked about black liberation and all of that, you know, almost every victim that I've worked with, victim meaning people who've lost their children or some other loved one to gun violence, they always say what I heard you say, both of you, Nate and Cleopatra, that we don't want this to happen to anyone else. We want to somehow stop this from happening to anyone else. And I just wonder, when you look at the stats, it's happened every day since Hadayah died. How does that make you feel that whatever you're doing, it's not at this moment able to help the lady down the street from losing her child? What does that feel like for you?
For me, it's not a negative thing, because it's probably not the lady down the street's child I need to save. It's probably someone else somewhere else who will be saved by, you know, listening to or hearing our story or seeing what it is that we're trying to do. It's someone. It's not going to be everyone all at once. So I think of it as a win. I think of it as an effort that's really worth it. It's not about seeing it happen immediately. You know, we go up here, we give a speech, we come off the panel, and we walk outside, and all the city of Chicago just stand there. We're not going to do this no more. That's fairy tale. The reality is, we have to figure out how to puncture that other bubble that's out there. We're on the same page. We have to get into the other group of people that's not on the same page in order to make the difference.
I think that's a powerful, powerful statement, because there are a lot of people, and I want us to encourage Sarah to continue to do her work, because this is fresh and new. You know, 2 years is not a long time.
I'm even less than her.
And you're less.
I was standing at work, in the same aisle, at the same place almost, when I grabbed my chest and said, I can imagine sending my child to school and them never coming home. Which is why when I talk to people and they say, I can't imagine, I stop them from completing a sentence, because I spoke that. And as we know.
You were standing in the same aisle. Finish that point.
So I was at work when I heard about what happened to Sandy Hook. And we were devastated, and we're in Chicago, we're devastated, and everybody wants to pull the story up and read about it and hear what's going on, you know, we're just devastated, you know, and I literally stood up from my desk and said, oh my goodness, I can imagine, because that was a conversation being had. And the next month, I'm at work again, but I get my phone call. And I had sent my child to school, and she never came home. So.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's deep.
Very deep.
I think that's where the human rights aspect of it.
I don't hear Sarah. Go ahead.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I think that's really where the human rights aspect of this comes in, and why it's so important that Amnesty International is involved, is that when we change the conversation and frame it as, if our young people can't have the right to go to school and learn safely, we have a problem. You know, a lot of people who argue against any form of gun violence prevention, you know, methods or progress will say, you know, we have the inalienable right to own as many firearms as we want by whomever we want all the time. But I say, if, you know, however many hundreds of kids are being killed senselessly by gun violence in ways that we can prevent, our lives as young Americans trump our right to live and be free and to learn and to go to school trumps any right to own an inanimate object.
Wow. So, Scholnick, I want to jump back to you because the point that was made that I want to get to is that it's not realistic to think that today the problem will be solved, right? We know that. And if there's a message, particularly for the younger people who are in this room who show up at one rally or 2 or 10 and then feel like, okay, I showed up for Trayvon. I was involved in Trayvon Martin. I was angry about it. I tweeted, I texted, I did everything. I sent money, I did everything. And then Jordan Davis happened. How do you tell them that they have to stay engaged? How do you tell them that?
So that's a great question. And I'm not sure I would tell a young person that they have to stay engaged. I don't think that's the message that I would give to young people. The message that I'm really interested in is young people understanding what they have at stake and what's happening in this society. And whatever way that basically what I'm getting to is their self-interest, right? Like what at the root of them, what do they want to see enacted out in the world? What values do they have? And what contribution do they want to make to that? That may not mean being an activist. It may not mean that. It may not mean being an organizer. It may mean going to school every day and respecting the person who's in class with you, right? It may mean writing publicly. It may mean maintaining a blog where you talk about the issues that are important to you. But for me as an organizer, and for young people any young person who's interested in liberation for themselves, or freedom for themselves, or creating justice in the world, I would encourage you to seek out other people who think like you, and other people who want to see the same kind of world that you want to see. And then you organize yourselves. It's not easy. I think out of the 2008 presidential campaign, organizing got this glorious veneer to it. Community organizing is like the thing to do. But nothing that has ever completely changed this country or this world has ever come easy, right? The Montgomery bus boycott didn't just happen because Rosa Parks decided to sit down one day. She was an organizer.
That's right.
There was strategy behind that. And so, as for a young person in Chicago, where for many young people in Chicago, it's about survival. So what message do you give to a young black boy or a young black girl about survival when they hear every few months or every so often that another young person has lost their lives, right? And so what we have to do, I think we have a responsibility to do and not just for young people, but for young people to be engaged, is around really holding the people accountable who have the power to make those changes. One thing that's in this report that I really, really liked in the Chicago and Illinois gun violence report is about the school closings. So the school closings that were facilitated and allowed by our mayor, Rahm Emanuel, were an act of violence on our community. They were an act of violence. And so I think and now those schools are about to go up for sale. So, I mean, there's many questions that you can ask about who's going to profit from the closing of these schools, but we do know who's going to suffer from the closing of these schools. And so young people were involved. Young people were there. They were protesting, they were organizing, they were engaged in acts of indirect action and civil disobedience. But that was one of the battles in a longer term fight to fight against structural racism, against poverty, against patriarchy, against white supremacy, not just in this city, but beyond. And so I think we all have to figure out what contribution we want to make to that bucket. And it's going to look different for everyone. Not everybody's going to be Barack Obama. Not everybody's going to be Tamika Mallory. Like she's flat. So everybody's not going to be Tamika Mallory. But everybody has something to contribute. If you are a white person sitting in this audience right now feeling guilty, leave that at the door. Because you have a contribution to make. You have an important contribution to make, especially young white folks. You're here in this room, you've already made a step, right? If you're a young black person in this room who feels like, yo, I'm just trying to survive and pay my bills, like that is what I'm really interested in. There are opportunities, particularly through the Black Youth Project 100, where we are currently working on draft legislation to fight for jobs for people as a method to prevent gun violence, which has been proven. It sounds simple, right? It sounds really simple, but in many people who are formerly incarcerated, young people who have been in the detention center system, people need jobs. They want to be able to feed themselves and their families. And so those are concrete things that we're working on right here in Chicago and that many other people are working on as well that get to the structural issues. And so it may not be BYP 100 for you, but if you're here already, you may already know about an organization. But I'm sure that you have a friend who's not involved in something, so I encourage you to just ask at least one of your friends to join something that you're involved in, something that they care about, to help change the things that they want to see change.
Wow, Charlene, those were powerful, powerful points. Very powerful. So, Michael, you are in media. GlobalGrind.com has, 4 million people
13.
going to your site? I'm sorry? 13 million. Oh, excuse me. Excuse me. You could have said yes.
You got nicer shoes than I do.
Going to your site, on a consistent basis, and you are editor-in-chief of GlobalGrind.com, which many of you young people are looking. If you're not looking on the site on a regular basis, you should be, because there's a lot of information. I read somewhere that one of your goals is to combat ignorance, which I think is a powerful point. But we see ignorance across media in general. That's the norm, ignorance. The Love and Hip Hops and the Housewives of whatever city you live in, and all of these different shows that perpetuate violence and ignorance on a consistent basis. What is the media getting wrong here? Or maybe you feel like the media is getting it right, but what is the media doing? And do you think that if we continue to have it the way it is, that we can build some sort of real movement for change when everything that's being pumped into the minds of young people is so overwhelmingly negative?
Well, I think that the number one record on the radio right now is I'm happy, right? It's
Okay,
real.
all right.
So I think that there is, I get asked a question a lot about hip hop. And because I work for Russell Simmons, who owns GlobalGrind.com, and for those who don't know, Russell Simmons is considered one of the godfathers of the music industry and founded Def Jam Records. So I get asked a lot, is hip hop the problem? Certainly in this city, I've been asked about Chief Keef and had a public dispute with the police, we don't call him a commissioner, but the police superintendent over Chief Keef's influence in terms of the violence in this city. To Charlene's point, I think Charlene is making some damn good points.
Yes.
And really damn good points. And if I can, Charlene, if you give me the privilege just to maybe add on to what you were saying about the structural piece, we often get distracted. And I don't want to, as a kid who grew up in hip hop, a fan of hip hop, I can critique it as well. And I could sit here and I could critique, as someone who made movies for 12 years, I could critique media. And I could critique Hollywood and I could critique video games, and those conversations should be had. They're healthy, and there's a piece of entertainment in media that certainly is just about a bottom line, and that often, but let us not forget that in Mr. and Mrs. Smith, Angelina Jolie and Brad Pitt were killing people in their underwear, the two sexiest people on the planet, in their underwear, shooting everybody. So it's not just hip hop. And black people, they're talking and promoting violence in entertainment. And I think that's an important point as we critique And not just entertainment, but also the military-industrial complex that this country has perpetuated, the idea of being violent. But if I can for a moment, to Charlene's point, oftentimes I hear from people, that kids, their pants are sagging, right? And if they just pulled their pants up, or if the hip hop was positive, then we wouldn't have this problem. Well, to the structural piece, if I just talk about pants sagging for a moment, pants sagging came because we locked up 2.2 million people, black and brown people, in prison, and called it a war on drugs. It was really against a war against brown and black America in 1973 till today. And when guys went to prison, they couldn't have belts. Right? Because belts, you commit suicide with the belt or use it as a weapon. So guys in the 70s and 80s, would be in prison with their pants sagging. They come home to the South Side of Chicago or, South Side, Jamaica, Queens, and New York with their pants sagging. Young guys look at those guys as they're cool, they're gangsters, they're rappers, they're drug dealers, whoever they are, we like them. And so now we say, oh, pull your pants up. I would much rather talk about the structural racism that has put 2.2 million people in prison than the pants sagging. Let's end the war on drugs. Let's end mass incarceration. And the pants sagging won't be the issue. So oftentimes I think we get distracted, and I say this, there are many, I won't say all, but there are some white folks in the media, white folks in public office who would love for us to argue about the N-word, argue about hip hop, argue about pants sagging, because it's a distraction to how we created it. But we can do better.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say, let us spar for a moment
better.
here. So I agree with you. I mean, clearly, I think that when I was growing up, we had all types of hip hop, whether it be negative, positive, or whatever. But we were drawn to whatever it is that we were going to do, and that's just the bottom line. Because in our house, first of all, you couldn't bring it in. So even though I had it in my earlobes, I was listening to Little Kim. And it's so funny because I was telling my son, who, as I said, is 15, I can't, Nicki Minaj, I just can't take it. I don't know what she's talking about. She looks crazy and she's saying all this stuff. And he goes, Mom, you know every Little Kim song. And she was saying like the same stuff. And I was like, oh. Yeah, that's true. So we always had that. But then there was like Bill Cosby on TV too. So I have to ask you, like when you look at what's on TV today and what's being marketed to young people, Bill Cosby is like it's not on the roster. So I have to ask whether or not there is some people say conspiracy to pump our young people with negativity versus giving them positive things that they need in order to see themselves in a better light.
I think, I'll be brief because they have a lot more important things to say than I do, but I think Lupita is a good example. I think Lupita's next role will be a telling tale of what happens in Hollywood. She can play a slave incredibly well, but can she play Jared Leto's love interest? Right? Can she play a superstar? Can she be, Jennifer Lawrence in The Hunger Games?
Do you guys know who Lupita is?
Right? She was in 12 Years a Slave,
that's right.
So to me, I want to see what they offer her next. Because she's a phenomenal actress, Yale trained, classically trained actress. She can do anything. But what they offer her next, I think, is a telling tale. The stuff on television, I think that, I don't know. I'd rather look at I don't want to break the mirror. I want to look at us. Right. So when I see commercialism in hip hop, I don't want to pick on you, Tamika, but you have nice shoes on. So we like nice things.
We like nice things. Right? But I work hard.
Yeah, we work hard.
And so what
certainly.
I'm saying is that there are people who, I go out and I speak to young people and they look at me and go, yo, how did you get those shoes? Well, I definitely was not on a reality TV show fighting and scratching. Like I have to go to work in order to get these shoes. So, anyway, it's an issue that we have to keep talking about. But we're going to come back to, because Michael and I will talk about this all day and just set up another conversation.
That's tomorrow at 4 o'clock in the small
tomorrow at 4 o'clock in the small room. The Hadayah Pendleton Foundation, we want to leave here with action items. And Hadayah being a young person and all these young people in the room, how can they help you? What can they do? How can they be involved, Nate? Nate?
You said Nate. Oh, I thought you said Nate. See?
Well, hey, it's okay. It's all good. And you do have nice shoes.
Well, thank you. I'm gonna have to wear these all the time. That's it. These are my favorite shoes now.
You know what they can do is they can contact us. Cleopatra has the number. Oh, well, it's 1-800-4-HADAYAH.
It's 855-4-HADAYAH.
855-4-HADAYAH.
I don't know why he can't remember this number. I just don't know.
You know what? It's in my phone.
Simple for that reason.
It's in my phone, and I don't remember too many numbers anymore.
We know how to find things when we want it.
Yes,
That's true.
yes.
But you know what? I would really encourage all the young people, you know, if you know, making a difference is a passion of yours, to definitely reach out and present us with different ideas from your perspective. Because, you know, he's old, and so he's looking at old things.
But no, we definitely
old
need
ideas.
We definitely need your ideas because yes, we are definitely a different generation.
Yes.
Our generation. I mean, I couldn't have imagined doing some of the things or saying some of the things that you guys are able to say today in front of my parents. Oh man, I lived in the era of getting slapped in the mouth.
It's a good era.
Right, that was a good era. Yeah. No, but I think that's important. So what I'm hearing you all say is that young people who are here today, or people in general who are here today, they need ideas, they need participation. So as we leave here and we talk about what can I do, how can I be involved, this is an organization that's armed, their doors are open to anyone who is here who can help them. And that brings me right back to you, Sarah. What would you suggest to these young people about how they can be supportive?
Like you mentioned in the beginning, sort of the goal and the take that me and a lot of my friends who are doing this work try to work towards is bringing together young people from urban communities, suburban communities, and rural communities. Because how many of you here have heard a conversation as intense and as comprehensive as this one before? Not that many of you. Some of you, that you might be an exception because we're at this conference. But
there was a large group of people who didn't.
Most of you have not. Young people want to have this conversation. These issues are the issues that are affecting us. About 2 months ago, I helped to co-organize a national summit on gun violence prevention leadership with the organization Generation Progress, which is the millennial sort of young person's advocacy branch of the Center for American Progress. And we had over 120 students come from more than 34 states. More than half of our participants were students of color. We had representatives from BYP 100, from Dream Defenders, NAACP College. So we had this really incredible, diverse group of young people who just wanted to have these conversations, to share their stories, and to strategize about how we can move forward together as a generation who wants to make change and who want to fight for our rights to live in safe communities. Now, after the summit, that was sort of our kickoff, we're creating this network of young people, and they were sort of our start, our base. And now we have regional organizers who are working on a more personal level with young people who want to start groups on high schools and on college campuses who want to address these issues. We have the resources, we have the network, we have role models like Michael and like Tamika who can help us. So I would just say to anybody out there as an action item, if you're interested in talking about any one of these sort of sub-issues of gun violence that we've talked about, or you just want to learn more about how you can get involved, I would say look into contacting Generation Progress. You can find them on Facebook, on Twitter. But this network, we are holding our arms wide open because we want this to be as diverse and as comprehensive as we can. We want to give you resources. And so I would just say contact Generation Progress because we're in the works of creating this network, and it could possibly be the starting point of a real unified movement for young people with the leadership of amazing groups that are already developed like BYP 100 and Dream Defenders and National Action Network.
Well, thank you, Sarah. We're going to open up for questions and answers. And two things I want to do before we do that is, one, the information about our social media was up on the screen. Can we get it back, please? So whenever it comes back, those of you who have social media, which is probably most of this room, how many of you in here have social media on your phone, use social media? Wow. Wow. So, so those of you who can and will, would you please use this information to tweet out what you've learned, what you've heard, or the fact that you're just in this room today? We would appreciate it so that Amnesty International's message can spread, and also the message of those who are sitting on this panel today. And just let folks know where you've been and what you're doing. That's one of the first steps to being an activist, is just spreading information and making sure other people know about what you're doing. The last thing I want to do, as I guess we're going to have folks to stand online to do questions and answers. I want to just go back to you, Michael, on this one point. We've been talking, you and I and a group of us who are working across the country, about the economic challenges around gun violence. And when you made a comment that, you know, this is not something that you understand as a personal matter. It's not something that you'll wake up tomorrow and 10 people in your family will be shot. Like, that's just not your reality. But it is your reality that it affects you in your pocket, right? Because we know that there are economic disadvantages to burying folks, triage in hospitals, and all of the different issues that go along with, with gun violence. So why don't you talk a little bit about that as we have folks to come for questions and answers, and then we'll go right to the audience.
Yeah, I'll try to be brief. I think as we just looked at, who here lives outside of the United States? Lives outside now, currently. Currently, you can clap for them. Well, welcome to Chicago. So as we just finished the enrollment process for the Affordable Health Care Act, just this past week, I had a thought a while ago about gun violence and why we weren't getting the political change that we thought we could get over the past couple of years. And I thought in affordable health care, when the president went out during that first summer of 2009 during his first term, he tried to make the moral argument about health care that it was the right thing to do. It was, it was a human right, that everyone deserves the right to health care, and that just didn't work here in this country. Folks didn't want to hear that, or a lot of folks didn't want to hear that. And it wasn't until he brought up the economics of health care that it saved this country $900 billion. I was like, oh, that's a good idea. We should get affordable health care. I've thought a lot about the conversation around gun violence, and you listen to these stories, and they give you pain inside. But when we go talk to folks who don't feel that pain or don't have that empathy, we don't get very far. And so the city of Chicago, as an example, just last year, the shootings in the city of Chicago cost the city $2.5 billion. It's about $2,500 per household cost, right? So someone's got to pay for it, right? And it's us, taxpayers, who are paying for this. And so I don't look at the work of the Hadayah Pendleton Foundation as charity. It's investment. We got to stop thinking when our friends who are doing the work, and we go try to help them and raise money for them, that we're asking for handouts and charity, because the work that Nate and Cleo is doing, the work that Charlene is doing, the work that Sarah is doing, it's investing in our young people. We don't look at our military as charity. Our military is investment in our security. So for me, I think if we can change a piece of the narrative, that we spend more money as a public on shootings in our urban communities than we did in the war in Iraq. We spend $564 per person in this country. We're paying $564 per person. We paid $490 per person per year in the war in Iraq. So we fought so hard against that war, many of us, most of us, I'm sure most of us in this room did. And a lot of it was we're losing lives, we're killing hundreds of thousands of innocent people, but we also were wasting hundreds of millions and billions of dollars on an unjust war. And we're doing the same thing in this country as we talk about bringing the conversation home, this war at home that's happening in our own communities in this country. We should also be talking about what it's costing us. And if we invested that money into programs that are working, that are saving lives. That's the most important part. If we could have saved the life of these two beautiful people, you couldn't put a price tag to it. So I want to challenge us to engage our conversation with folks who we think may not agree with us. We're finding great progress, believe it or not, in the war on drugs with libertarians because of the economic discussion. I'm sure there's a lot of folks in this room who are libertarians or who relate to folks in the Libertarian Party and believe in some of their principles, and that conversation is happening because of the economics. So I don't want to belittle at all. The most important part is saving lives. There's not even an option. But if we can also have that small piece of a conversation about if we save money, we'd save more lives, that would help.
So we're going to start the Q&A. Before we do that, I just want to make sure we take care of two housekeeping issues, and that is one, to welcome and acknowledge Karen Lewis, who is the head of the Chicago Teachers Union. Thank you so much for being with us. And then also, we want to give a rousing applause and thank you, appreciation to Steve Hawkins, the Executive Director of Amnesty International USA. So, as a housekeeping issue, we're going to do Q&A from one side to the other, and we're going to ask questions. And I'm really, really good at cutting people off. Really good at it. So if you're not asking a question, we're not going to allow you to speak just because there are other people who we need to respect their time and the fact that other folks are behind you. So let's go with the gentleman here. Go ahead.
You literally will not allow a 30-second comment. You want only questions?
We want questions. I've been told questions. I'm checking with the organizers.
If you
30
allow
seconds. Go ahead.
Okay. You've asked the question, what can young people do to better the circumstances? You've also pointed out that there's an age gap between the older people and the younger people. Let me suggest to you that the time to get involved, the right time to get involved, is right now. And that the place to get involved is the local community. That's the people with whom we work every day. Those are the people with whom we study. And there are in every community a number of different organizations that we can link with. League of Women Voters, ACLU, the anti-bullying groups that are starting. And we need the younger people. We need the younger people in those groups. I'm on the board of directors for the League of Women Voters. We don't have a younger person in the group, and we wish they did, and we're reaching out. Wow. That would be a great way to help.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
Hello. Hi, my name is Karima. Thank you all very much for being here. So we talk a lot about the innocent victims of gun violence, and we say they didn't deserve it, or it shouldn't have been them, and of course it shouldn't have. But I kind of want to bring up these people who are a part of the gun violence who do also get killed by it, the gangbangers, the drug dealers, the people who some say or might feel, well, their lives aren't as worthy as these other people who are on the honor roll, who are on the cheerleading team, who are on the football team, who get parades. You know, I live in Evanston, and the kid who got killed, who was on the football team, got a parade with his picture up. But the other one who got killed, who's in a gang, people kind of have this vibe like he deserved it. So what do you have to say to the people who have this idea in their mind that some deserve, they may not say it out loud, but they feel like some are more deserving than others to be affected by this gun violence? I just wondered if anyone had something to say about that.
Go ahead.
I can answer that. Every life is important. I mean, in the end, every life is important, but we definitely need to ask ourselves, and kids need to ask themselves, how important is your life to you? Because if you're not placing value on your own life, how can somebody else place it? You know, you can't put yourself in situations like that and then think you're Superman and bullets are just gonna bounce off of you. It just doesn't happen.
Go ahead.
thanking all the forceful speakers. It's quite an assignment for Amnesty to be an ally to you, but I have an actual question asking for information that I don't know. We like to say that we respect the military and we thank them for their service, but how much of a tie-in is there between coming back from the military, coming back from the war, and getting into gun violence yourself afterwards?
That's a very, very good question. Michael, since you brought up the military.
I mean, a quarter of gun deaths in this country are veterans who commit suicide. So that's gun violence. 22 veterans commit suicide a day in this country, today. 22 veterans will commit suicide. We just saw Fort Hood happen just 3 days ago, where a gentleman, shot, killed 3 people, and then put the gun in himself and killed himself. I think there is, it is the quiet war that's happening in this country amongst our generation is our friends who are coming home from Iraq and Afghanistan who are not being given the proper treatment for mental illnesses and PTSD. So it's an excellent point. We have to do a lot better.
Before we go here, I just want to make sure that we inform everyone that Sarah's Twitter name is Sarah with an H and a double underscore, then Clems, C-L-E-M-S. So it's a double underscore that was between Sarah and Clems. Go ahead. You have to change that.
Thank you. Thank you, panel. Everyone on the panel, thank you very much. Mr. and Mrs. Pendleton especially. But I have a question. My name is Rashida Shukurat Weaver, African Youth Coalition Against Hunger, Malnutrition, HIV, and AIDS. And recently in this city, we just had a primary, the electoral primary for the Democratic Party and for the Republican Party. At the very, very bottom of our ballots, there was a section about concealed carry and the right to conceal and carry weapons here in this city in Chicago. And not many people talked about that on the news at all. I voted against it, and I'm sure there are many other people in here who did. But I'd like to hear from the panel, what do you think about that law, concealed carry? And can it be repealed? Should we repeal it?
Charlene, you want to?
So that's a great question. And I'll be fully transparent in that I don't know the full scope of the law or the ballot initiative here in Chicago. But what I will say is that we should ask ourselves who stands to benefit from the passing of that law. And so there are corporations who will benefit, the gun lobby who will benefit from the sale of guns. And the sale of those guns, regardless of what people do with those guns, oftentimes we look at what people do and not actually the people who are profiting from it. And so I don't think for one moment that initiative was on the ballot just because a legislator here in Chicago decided to work to get it on there. There was a lobby behind that. And so I think that, I'm not sure what she is. I think it's really important for us as activists to really look at who stands to benefit from the passing of any law or any ballot initiative. And I would say for concealed carry, particularly in Chicago, I'm not even if it is not law in Chicago, I'm not positive that the sale of illegal guns on the south side and the west side of Chicago would even be impacted by concealed carry legislation. And so because a lot of folks, and even the guns that are that go missing from the Chicago Police Department. And so how do you actually get to, the fact that lots of guns are lost from the Chicago Police Department? There are illicit gun sellers outside and within the city of Chicago. Concealed and carry doesn't even put a drop in that because folks, they're not carrying them so-called legally, right? And so I think it's another distraction, particularly in Chicago.
And if I can piggyback off of that, conceal and carry, these are the people that's not committing the crimes, that's actually going through the whole process of getting a gun. The thing is, what our main objective is stopping the people that don't need to have guns from having them. That's the question. How do we do that?
Well, let me just say something on that. Sensible gun laws also help that. I think people, again, lose their focus on why we're trying to put these laws on the books. Yeah, okay, so I ask you to take a little bit longer so we can do a more thorough background check. yeah, that's okay, because in the future, there could be other people that are unfit to try to purchase a gun legally that, that should be denied. It's not all about the person making the purchases right now. I mean, of course, someone that's trying to obtain an illegal gun is not going to go through the regular,
Right.
The regular method for acquiring one, but it does put responsibility
Right.
on the person that did make the original purchase. I mean, we have to think about all of this. Not only that, I mean, you have conceal and carry. Now you have more people out here carrying weapons. You have many different reasons why I shot my weapon. You have stand your ground. You have so many different things. It makes me feel like I need to go out and get me a weapon too. Protect myself from the possibility of needing to be protected.
Can I add
You were
one
gonna
really
say,
quick thing?
sorry, but we got to go to the next question, but Sarah was going to say something.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, mention one thing as we're on the topic of legislative action. I actually have been on trips to Washington, D.C. with Mr. and Mrs. Pendleton. Can everybody hear me? Okay, no, okay. With Mr. and Mrs. Pendleton to Washington, D.C. to meet with members of Congress. And I would just say to the young people out there, when you hear all this like wonky language about legislation and lawmakers who seem so distant, you just see them on television as the talking heads, don't think that you can't make change in that area as well as these cultural issues. The last couple of times that I've been down to Washington, D.C., we've brought young people not just from Newtown, but also from Hartford, Connecticut, and from Chicago and from Oakland. And when a group of 10 young people sit down from Newtown, Chicago, and Hartford, for example, and we meet with a legislator and we make them listen to our stories, and we give them a list of all the gun deaths that have happened in this country since Newtown happened, that's making a difference. That's making a change. And they not only do a lot of them want to hear from their constituents, from you guys, but they need to hear from you. So even the ones that don't really want to hear from you, who are trying to hide from you, go to their offices, meet with them. Don't pay attention to this language. Talk to them about what you want. Tell them your stories. Your voice matters.
Push ahead. Push ahead. Go ahead.
Yes. I kind of find myself in a weird situation where I was a public school teacher in Cleveland Municipal Schools, and now I teach college in a rural Midwestern Ohio city, where now I have to direct my question to you, Sarah, because the gun violence has switched. How do you start these conversations with people, like when you said in the beginning, about their rights? The conversation has shifted from I need a gun to make my deals, or I'm not safe at night, to, I just got back from protecting my country and I'm a little twitchy, but I can protect people, and so I have to have this gun. It's very ingrained in the culture, and I didn't realize that rural America had it so ingrained in the culture that they needed their Second Amendment rights. They need them. So how do you start to have conversations with people who aren't necessarily criminals, but really believe that guns are the only way to protect themselves?
I think that's a great question, and I think the first step is to start talking. I think it's also to start demystifying the issue. Don't phrase this in ways that might make them feel like you want to infringe on their rights, or that you think they are dangerous. Talk to them as your friend. Talk to them as your neighbor. Bring up a story that you heard or an article that you read, and then start that conversation. But I think also, there are many statistics that show that when these incidents happen, like the one that just did at Fort Hood again, he was in treatment. He had family and friends that knew he was ill. When Newtown happened, they looked back into the shooter's past and saw that, family and friends knew that he was having trouble and wasn't seeing anybody, but nobody said anything. That one person that could have spoken up could have saved so many lives. So think about it in that way. Think about it as, if you think one of your friends is in trouble and they might, consider hurting themselves or somebody else, your push to keep them safe and to keep others safe, even though you might be breaking a promise or stepping out of that realm of friendship for a minute, you're saving a life, and that's what's most important. There's also, really quickly mention that the Brady campaign for gun violence prevention has this incredible system. It's basically a phone line, a hotline that goes for 24 hours a day. Anybody can call it if you think somebody is a threat or is mentally ill and might hurt themselves or somebody else. So look at the Brady campaign. They have a hotline that anybody can use at any time to save lives.
So we have a tweet question here from Matt Lakshan. How does the Youth Promise Act help us tackle this human toll of gun violence? And I don't know, Charlene, if maybe you want to tackle that. And then the last thing we're going to do is take a few of the questions. We're not going to be able to get to everyone. We have a lot of folks on this line, so we're going to take two right behind one another from here and then have the panel to try and respond. So go ahead, sir.
Yeah, so my question was directed on the issue of media and dialogue. You had mentioned reality television, and the one thing that I noticed about that is in our culture, it seems to be leading towards a serious lack of empathy towards difference and the categorization of people. And I think that if everybody here, as Americans, and really as human beings first and foremost, were to extend the same empathy to people who our society and our media categorizes as different, that we would see a much stronger reaction to what exactly is going on. With Hadayah in particular, it seems like people could empathize with her in a way that many other victims of gun violence were not subject to that same empathy. And I think getting out of this problem of really creating a movement, you do need people from a broad range of constituencies, but our media seems to be a constraint on that. And so my question is, how do we get out of that?
Well, I think you asked the question and answered it at the same time, so thank you very much. Let's have the next person, please.
Good job.
Thank you.
Hello, my question is about the media too. I'm an old guy, and I grew up when there was only 4 stations, and they went off at 10 o'clock.
The antennas, you're moving the antennas.
Right. And my concern is the sheer volume of violence that our children are exposed to. How do we deal with that? I watched a boy kill 100 people on television in a few minutes, with the video games. And the rap, people can hit over and over and over again. To me, it's like I grew up with 6 shooters, and these kids are getting machine guns in their head all the time. How do we deal with the sheer volume of violence that our kids are exposed to every day?
Okay, let's do the Youth Promise Act answer, and then, Michael, you want to take the hip-hop music?
So I'll be very, very brief. The Youth Promise Act is outlined in the call to action from Amnesty International in the gun violence report, and it specifically it's a federal bill that looks at providing support for young people, and specifically around gang violence, gang activity reduction or gang membership reduction, and providing mentoring services. I think federal legislation is extremely important. I don't want to sit on this panel and endorse the Youth Promise Act, right? But I do encourage that we support federal legislation that looks at things more holistically, and that's what the Youth Promise Act does do. It's really founded in evidence-based practice. I know many people feel differently about that. I'm a social worker in my former life. But I think that it's an important act especially for you all to support through Amnesty International.
In the interest of time, I would propose that in the next Amnesty conference, that there's a session on media and violence. I think it's a lot of questions, so let's table that. I'm happy to stick around afterwards and discuss it, but I think there's a lot of folks in line. So.
Well, thank you very much, Michael. And so we're going to take, first of all, Girls Rule the World. Margaret said that I could go a few minutes over to finish the questions that we have, the folks who are standing. So all of you who keep sending me these notes telling me to shut up, we're still going to talk for just a little while longer. So we're going to go back over here.
So when we talk about gun violence in the cities, we see it as a trend that needs to be stopped. My cousin was killed in a nice town in rural Maryland, and everyone saw it as just like tragic but kind of a freak occurrence. So how do we get people to talk about making sure it doesn't happen again when most of them don't believe that it is going to happen again?
I think one of the problems is with the narrative in the media. And the narrative in the media says that Chicago, you walk down the street in Chicago, you're likely, on the south side, you're likely to get shot.
Right.
Like, that is what the narrative says. The narrative also calls the city of Chicago a war zone and refers to it as Chirac, which is completely disrespectful to the people, because we're not, like the black people and Latino people in Chicago, we're not targets of war by the state, and we're not engaged in, we're not in the military. So it's like, it's not the same dynamic. So I think one of the problems is that the media says that this only happens in certain cities. I remember the news that came out after the shootings in Newtown. They said this doesn't happen in places like this. It can happen anywhere. And so until the media changes the narrative and we change the narrative as activists and organizers around where this actually happens, and take Chicago so much out of the news cycle. And so when something happens like that to your friend in rural Maryland, that is just as much of a tragedy in your community as when 11 people are shot at on the south side of Chicago over a weekend.
I would also just say that the best way for us to make sure that people don't forget about these incidents is to keep telling their stories. Right. You know, tell the story of your cousin who was shot. You know, our opponents, they're most afraid of this conversation that's happening right now. The people, like Charlene mentioned, who are profiting from gun violence don't want us to keep talking about this. So keep telling your cousin's story, keep talking about the issue, make sure the conversation is happening in your home, with your friends, in your school community, in any way that it can, because as long as we continue this conversation and grow this conversation in our communities, we'll see progress. And people can't forget. We won't let them.
So we're going to take 3 questions at once from this side, and then the panel can answer.
Hi, I'm Dan. Thank you all so much for your passion and your inspiration. There's been a lot of discussion of being able to distinguish between the distractions and the roots of the issues. But I think oftentimes the distractions are actually the seeds of the internalized oppression that is fueling this really destructive behavior. So I guess I would just, how can we sort through that and kind of get past that agenda?
Next. Thank you.
Hi, I really don't have a question. I have more of a comment. My name is Alexandria, and I've been organizing for at least 7 years now, and I'm at the age of 25. I've been going through these conferences since I was about 16, and I hear a lot of violence and a lot of gun violence, and we're sitting here and we're trying to figure out, like, how can we stop the gun violence for young people? But one thing we don't talk about is that between the ages of 15 and 19, for every 1,000 kids, 45 of those kids are having children. So therefore, we are leaving children that are having children without jobs, because it's hard enough for us to get jobs. And these children don't have jobs. So what else is there for them to do but create violence and kill and steal and do everything else to support their families?
Well, thank you. Thank you. Next.
Thank you all so much for speaking today. And Cleopatra and Nate, you both exude so much strength on the stage. So my question really is, what kind, if any, rehabilitation or counseling did you receive after your daughter was murdered or killed? I'm sorry. Thank you.
So we can have the answers. Now, the first question was related to sort of oppressive behavior, right?
Distractions and root causes.
Well, go ahead, since you opened your mouth.
Oh, because I was listening. It's a fantastic question. I don't think that because of distractions, therefore we don't discuss them. I think we certainly, your point's a good one. I think we certainly discuss them as well. But I think that as continuous comment is about creating the narrative, we also have to create our narrative, the conversation of how we want to fix these problems. And now, we said yesterday, I just want to credit Sarah and also a member of BYP 100, Jamira Burley. They were honored yesterday at the White House as champions of change by the president for their work in gun violence prevention. And there's a question at the end of the day was, how do we bring young people to the table? Well, we got to go to their table. Mm-hmm. They already have tables. They're very built tables. So many folks have already built tables that we as older folks have to come to your table and listen to you. So the conversation of distractions and the root problems, we have to listen to what you think are the solutions and come support those.
Let's take these 2 questions.
My name is Fatin Hassan. I'm the Consecutive Director of American Islamic Committee for Women and a Child. I like to thank and appreciate you're supporting for all of the human rights everywhere. Really appreciate it. And from this place and this position, my question for all democratic governments and decision makers is, until when will you keep supporting the military coups and dictators? Until when will these countries take vague stances for their own regional interests, irrespective of the simplest human right, which is the right to live? Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm the group coordinator for the Indianapolis local group, and the NRA is coming to Indianapolis 3 weeks from today. They kept this very secret until, and only let it out about 2 months before, so we haven't planned any actions. But my question to the group is, what is your recommendation on the best way to harness some of the energy from the activists and the voices we have in this room to get our message out 3 weeks from tonight to run a little counter to the NRA meeting? Thanks.
Meet us there.
You're trying to get me arrested.
Meet us there. We're going to be there.
You
so
pay for
meet us
gas,
there.
we'll be there.
Well, you guys said you're already going,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So, yeah, so the Hadayah Pendleton Foundation is already planning to be there 3 weeks from now, so now we can just join in.
That telephone number is 855-4-HADIYA, H-A-D-I-Y-A. Again, 855-4-HADIYA, H-A-D-I-Y-A. So you can get in contact with them and meet them there.
I also know that some groups, Mayors Against Illegal Guns and Moms Demand Action, are planning huge events around meeting the NRA convention there. So I'd say if you can get in contact with them. But I'd actually like to see, you know, if a lot of you live in this area, have a youth presence. You know, Mayors Against Legal Guns and Moms Demand Action are incredible groups, but they don't have a huge, actually really none at all, a youth presence in their organizations. So, and that's an area actually where our opponents lack. The NRA doesn't really have a very coordinated, very present youth branch, if you will. So if a lot of you young people want to take an immediate action and one where like a physical presence, I would say attend that convention, because there will be supporters with you. It shouldn't be too scary because you'll have supporters along with you. But if
You got Nate with you.
Yeah.
What are you worried about? You have Nate.
Right.
Let's do it.
I'm going to take this last question, but before I do that, I just want to say that there's also something to be said about national organizing. So even if you can't be at the conference, putting together an event in your town will get its own media presence. You can do something local. You don't always have to travel, but it does make a difference. Twitter rallies make a difference. Getting online and making sure tweet the president of NRA every day from now until the conference, and get your friends to really be involved in that activity. Go ahead.
All right, so thank you all so much for being here. You're inspiring. My question is, so I'm wondering how, in talking, like starting these conversations with people who don't want to have them and trying to make people understand things that they don't want to understand or engage in, how do you avoid getting discouraged? And especially being in positions of leadership and positions of advocacy, how do you keep yourself from saying, well, this can never happen. You can never convince someone in the NRA that they don't need a gun. Like, how do you keep yourself from getting discouraged in this, like, arduous fight to end all this violence?
I get discouraged all the time, but just get back up again and keep going. But go ahead.
I'd say, actually this happened to me 2 days ago. I was at an event, a luncheon, and a young girl came up to me and said, I'm a former NRA member. I went to their, Friends of the NRA events, but I want to know more about what you do. And so I started just having a general conversation, telling her the work that I've done, legislative action, sort of like those cultural change. Recently, I went with a group of Newtown students, met with a group of Harlem students for 3 hours, and we just shared our stories and talked about the types of gun violence and how we can strategize together as one. When I told her about those action items and how those action items are making change to prevent gun violence, she was like, wow, I didn't know that. I think it goes back to sort of like the media has this fatalistic view and this very narrow view of what gun violence prevention, what gun reform is. But I think if you can just talk about the work that's being done and break those barriers, then you'll change a lot of minds and open a lot of eyes.
So Sarah, just give your closing remarks on that note.
I would just say that young people have this innate ability to see the path to justice without being blinded by political games and repetitive rhetoric. And those two things are so much of what we see in this issue. So as young people, you need to use your voices, use your stories, no matter how close or how far from the issue you are, and join this network, this diverse, this comprehensive, this really inspiring network of young people on your campus. Even the smallest actions, like Tamika was mentioning, like what you can do if you can't physically be at the convention in 2 weeks. A couple of months ago, there was an NRA hashtag that was trending that said #I am the NRA. And a bunch of young people and then other gun violence prevention activists sort of hijacked the hashtag and started using it in a very sarcastic way and really pointing out the hypocrisies of the NRA. So even simple actions like using social media in that way, that opens a lot of doors and changes a lot of things. So you have the ability, you have the resources up on the stage and around the country, and utilize us. Come talk to me.
Closing remarks for you, Cleo.
First of all, everyone talks really fast. I thought I was quick, but I'm not fast as everyone else. There's about 14 different things I wanted to say since I've been on the stage. But I will say, first of all, Sarah's correct. Mirrors Against Illegal Guns and Moms Demand Action is they're two different, awesome networks. And that's actually how we're actually gonna be at the NRA convention with just tons of people. I'm so excited about what's to come of that. I encourage everyone, use your voice, and don't use your voice only in your community. Go outside your community, have real conversations. Talk about what's happening on your block versus their block and see how we can fix it. You know, you need different perspectives, the very, diverse conversation in order to come up with a solution. Because if the solution was on your block would be fine. So I just, I encourage you all to find somewhere to get involved. Someone did make the comment that, there are local organizations, and there are. I mean, there are local organizations, within each community. There are national organizations, and then there are up-and-coming grassroots organizations. There's the one you're going to also want to create, and I encourage you to do that. I mean, this is not something that's going to end overnight, but it is something that we can all contribute towards resolving.
Thank you. Nate, closing remark?
My closing remark is going to be on what the lady said. How do we prevent from being discouraged? Don't think for 1 minute that I'm not discouraged a lot in this. But believe me, prayer works. Prayer, meditation, it works. Just collect your thoughts because you need them. Collect them and just give them. Give them the way they come out your heart.
It's bigger than you.
That's it.
Wow, thank you. Charlene, closing remarks?
Yeah, so to answer just a bit of your question, as Frederick Douglass said, power concedes to nothing without a demand. And what I would add to that is that power concedes to nothing without an organized demand. And so for everyone in the room, I would ask you to follow us on Twitter. It's @BYP_100. Like us on Facebook, and also visit our website, www.byp100.org, and sign up for our newsletter and stay in touch with us. If you are a young Black person between the ages of 18 and 35 who's interested in being involved in political organizing, please come to me after the panel, and I'd love to talk to you more about our organization. If you are not Black in between the ages of 18 and 35 and following all that other stuff, please support the organizations and the people who are up here on the stage today, and absolutely support Amnesty International and their work. Thank you.
I feel like I'm in the club too late. The lights just went out, and you gotta leave the club now. There's three folks in this room who could be on this stage talking about issues that you are experts and passionate on. It's a pleasure to speak on issues that we're passionate on. It's a marathon, and you don't have to get to the finish line.
Yes.
Your most memorable moment of the work you do could be in mile 3, in mile 10, in mile 15. And I'm only on mile 1, and every day I want to keep trying to get to mile 2. And so just embrace where you are presently right now, and don't worry if you don't get to the end, because that journey is remarkable to experience.
Thank you. I just want to say that I think this was a dynamic conversation. Again, I want to thank Amnesty International for having me here to moderate this discussion with these powerful folks. I want to thank the panelists for being just amazing and remarkable in terms of information, and thank all of you for being engaged in this conversation.